It's now 7 minutes after 7. This is Morning Express, time for the newsroom. And I'll start first of all by introducing our panel. Starting from my extreme left, we have Chrispus Yankem, who is a communication consultant. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Good to see you, Michael.
Good. Koki Ochieng, who is a lecturer at USIU Media Department.
Good morning.
Dr. Nancy Buka, who is also the chair for Media Department in MMU, Multimedia University. Karibu sana. Last but not least, Patrick Gathara, who is also a communication consultant and a cartoonist as well. Great to have you all. And well, let's start off first of all with a story that was trending over the weekend, and this was hashtag Free David Odongo. And this was a Standard Media group, or rather Nairobian editor who was arrested over the weekend, and it was because of a story that he ran. And it was our desire to have him in the studio, but he was not able to come. We've also tried to raise him on phone just to get the story from him, but we're not able to raise him. But this is part of what he had to say after the arrest, which the police came out to say it was not an arrest, he was just doing a statement. But let's first of all hear from David Odongo.
So I went to Embakasi and I found that they had already arrived there. And they asked for a room. They didn't tell me they were arresting me. They asked me for a room. They asked for the guys in charge for a room. And I was taken to that room and they started interrogating me. I asked them, why am I being interrogated? And one of them, two had left. And one of them was in the room with me, told me, umekasirisha mzee sana. And they produced a copy of the Nairobian newspaper. 2 weeks ago, we'd done a story on a billionaire Kimani Rugendo. So he said, umekasirisha mzee. Mbona umeka mzee page 1? One of them was asking me. The two were out of the room by then. Only one was with me. Mbona umeka mzee page 1?
Okay, so that's what David Odongo had to say. Let me start with you, Gathara, on media freedom threats. It seems to be under threat every single day. We'll come to some of what has been happening in the courts, but let's just start with the story of David Odongo.
Well, I think just listening to the clip, it's clearly obvious a case of harassment. And it's not the first time that the police have arrested somebody or detained somebody, then said that they hadn't arrested them. Remember, the Ngrashu case was the same thing.
Right.
Where they said they were just holding him to make a statement and stuff when they actually wanted him to reveal his sources. I think the big issue here, is that the police are actually breaking the law. Because there are certain specific cases within which, or certain specific circumstances within which a policeman can actually arrest you. And if they do that outside of, if they arrest you outside of these circumstances, the law says they should be punished. That's in the Police Act. The freedom of expression is obviously safeguarded in the Constitution. So I think beyond just, we saw social media, the Free Ngirashu hashtag. But I think we need to go beyond that and to ask what actions actually being taken against these people who are harassing journalists, against these people who are infringing on the rights of citizens. It was good to hear the IGP say that they are going to investigate this, but we need now to keep a focus on this so it doesn't just get lost. That individuals are held to account, people are actually prosecuted, for doing this.
Okay, let me come to you, Koki, and what's the story bigger than just the arrest? Because it seems we've reported about arrests before. We've reported on harassment, but it doesn't seem to be ending. There seems to be an underhand somewhere.
I think one of the things that we need to recognize is that the media fraternity, we are quiet when things are kind of not just on our side, and I'm not sure why. But I think the overriding issue is to understand that the journalists, so long as you are affiliated to a media house and you are basically reporting an injustice, a social injustice, as it were, you are actually shielded by laws, and we know the laws that shield us. You have the right of protection of sources. Of course, within the media house, you'll have to reveal who your sources are. And secondly, you basically will tell a story and give the person who is on the other side a right to reply. So I think, again, the ability of maybe some people to kind of bend the arm of the law because their status in society should not be an issue that we take lightly as media.
Okay, Chrispus, do you think we are just scratching the surface when we put up a report like this? And like Gathara says, it's okay to have the hashtag and have him freed after a while, but really, does that really get the whole thing sorted out? As the members of the Fourth Estate, what can we do? Of course, we can't arrest, but what can we do to ensure that this stops?
Well, thank you, Mike. First of all, I think I want to say that I like the panel. It's well composed.
Gender balance.
I think you deserve a commendation. Yeah. But anyway, coming to your question, I think, first of all, I would also admit that it is a story that I haven't followed very well because of one or two reasons. But from the little I know, I think Odongo's case is something that must be condemned by everyone in this country. And I'd want to believe that it is not an attempt to claw back on our civil liberties, because most of these things are actually enshrined in the Constitution, freedom of the media, and the rights, actually, various rights. But what I'm wondering is, specifically regarding your question of scratching the surface, I don't know what the underlying issues are, because Odongo's case is actually the latest. We've seen a lot of these things before. But the question is, what are our relevant bodies, like the Editors Guild, of course, the Media Owners Association and the Media Council, doing about such kind of things? Because we must have a way forward so that our journalists can no longer be harassed in this country, because it is not a good thing. We are not like Uganda. We are not like Rwanda. And this is a free country. We must actually be able to let our journalists operate in the free world and tell the stories that are supposed to be told.
Right. Dr. Buka, is it a case where possibly as journalists we are not fully in touch with the law that protects us?
I think several reasons. I mean, looking at just the event of this last weekend, the arrest of Odongo, when he was arrested, the hashtag came up, and a lot of talk on social media, on various WhatsApp groups, as to, securing his release. Finally, when he got released, the story ends there. And for many journalists, it's finally he's out. And I think we are also partly to blame. I was one of those who was glad that he was out. But beyond that, asking ourselves exactly why was he arrested, and what does this then portend, for those that are practicing?
He made, he said that one of the officers said,
yes, and that has not been explained. And I think this is a wake-up call for those of us in media, that it's not just about, when journalists find themselves in such a situation, that we rush to secure their release, and after that, then we think that they are free. The fact that they are not at the police stations or being holed up in rooms recording statements or doing whatever it is that they've been asked to do, and now that they're out, doesn't mean that they're actually free, And that freedom should go beyond that. It means that we then interrogate, what are the reasons that are actually leading to this? Who should be held accountable? And keeping that conversation on top of the table so that we talk about it. When you look at the coverage of that particular incident, I think it was hushed after he came out, and nobody else has gone further to interrogate what were the reasons behind it. I have looked at the story and I've been asking myself, am I the one who's not seeing what everybody else is seeing? Maybe I'm not, but that then needs to be, to be interrogated further, and that the stakeholders who are, really pushing for his release, should not stop at that point that he's now out, but should ask themselves, what does this then mean? But the other thing that I wanted to say is that oftentimes when media is, or when journalists are, arrested or holed up, and that kind of scenario, it's also an opportunity for us to pride ourselves in the fact that certain people are uncomfortable with the coverage that that media has, and it shouldn't unsettle us too much. The only thing is that it needs to be done within the law. Okay, but it is a good point, because it's a good step. It's a good thing to happen when media is not in confrontation, or rather when media is seen to be doing the right thing. Then the question we are asking ourselves is why then should for example, those in political office and those in government be very comfortable with media. Right. And so there are two lessons to learn from it. But I think most importantly is, having Odongo outside of the police station does not necessarily mean that he's free. And that freedom needs to be taken a lot further by interrogating why exactly was he arrested in the first place, and where does all this sit, within the law, and interrogating the offices that are then held responsible for that. Right. And that for us as media, that we bring that conversation to bear, and we need to sustain it so that then we also safeguard the freedoms that we have.
One thing I would add is you will remember that a lot of this was actually brought to light by social media. Lots of noise made on social media, and there's no real follow-up, by the mainstream element of media, although it was one of their own journalists, who had been arrested. I mean, and this is sort of a pattern that goes on. Same thing with Ngirashi. It's just allowed to fade away, and stuff. Nobody
like
goes.
Dr. Boka says, and the fact that he's out doesn't mean he's free.
Precisely, and actually, if you put it in a context, you will remember there have been several reports issued, both by the Committee for the Protection of Journalists, by Reporters Without Borders, that speak of the space for journalists in Kenya shrinking. And until we recognize that these are just symptoms of a wider problem, and the problem is the government not being comfortable, people in power not being comfortable with a free press, with a press that's able to freely report and speak, and we'll get to that when we speak about KFCB. Yes. It's actually just a symptom, and we need to tackle the actual problem. And we need to be securing. We need to be finding journalists who go to people like the Independent Policing Oversight Authority and ask them, it is your job to police the police. So when they are out there arresting journalists, what are you doing? And these sorts of questions, and ensuring that people are actually held to account, people are prosecuted. It's not enough for the IG to say we are investigating. We need to see people prosecuted, because the impunity of doing it is the fact that they know they pay no price when they arrest a journalist. That means they'll keep on doing it.
Can I add on to the training aspect and the rights, as a journalist? I think in most curriculums that we have at the university that teach journalism, media ethics and law is robustly taught. It's a robust element of the curriculum. Maybe the challenge would be after the schooling bit of it and all the changes that come in. For example, the KICB law and whatever other laws that come in to change the dynamics is what maybe media houses and journalism schools need to update every other time. Because the implication of what maybe Mutua is saying on content, timings and showings, all that needs to be looked at as a composite area, so that every time you're talking about media laws, journalists and the public are updated as to what is the implication of the laws that are coming into play. Okay, Chrispus, I think we're all in agreement that there's definitely something wrong and we're dropping the ball, even when it comes to our own. Question would be, what do we need to do? What are the hard questions? Or more importantly, what is the cause? Is it that we are too quick to move on to the next story and forget this one until it becomes another story that is hashtagged by social media? What is it that causes us not to follow up?
I think on the flip side, I want to agree with Daktari when she talked about it is a good thing actually to be locked out, because it reminds me of my former lecturer, and may God rest his soul in peace, and Durango, who told me that you are not a journalist until you are locked up and whipped. So I think Odongo should be proud of that.
So is that a way of saying we should accept it?
No, I'm not saying that it is a way of, it is actually a way of telling us that we are doing something good, we are critical, and somebody somewhere is feeling the pinch of the media, feeling the pain of actually being highlighted in the media. But I think going forward, the critical question, you talked about the police asking Odongo that you made something that
umekasirisha mzee
on the front page. I think that is Yeah, that is a question that we must actually now start interrogating. Who's this Mzee Odongo or the police officer is talking about? Is it the tycoon or is it somebody within the police? I think that is a laid-up question that must be interrogated by the media. But again, we need actually to find out, like Gathara said, the Independent Police Oversight Authority. We need now to put hard questions to them because they don't just exist to be there on paper. They must actually stand up and protect.
They earn salaries, you have to remember.
They earn
Yes,
salaries.
and they're paid by the taxpayer now.
Maybe one more thing.
Yeah.
It's not just the police. What about Media Council? What about KUJ?
Yes.
Actually,
What
I was just
about
coming to a question here from Paul Otieno, who is asking who can sue the state on or individuals on behalf of journalists.
Yes.
In short, who defends journalists'
It's
rights?
And this is why I
KUJ.
said that you guys in the media must have taken this story even to the Editors Guild. Let them stand up for Odongo. Let them stand up for Ngirachus. Let them stand up for every other journalist who's
I will say one thing about the Media Council specifically. We've got to remember this is a state body. It is established by the state, it is paid by the state, it is funded by the
So
state.
in
We
short,
But it doesn't mean that it is not independent.
So,
Gathara.
No,
let
it
me
doesn't
finish,
mean
let me
that,
finish. So we have to be careful when we think that it is always on our side. It's actually not. For me, I think for media to stand on its own, to stand up and say, in fact, the whole point of self-regulation that we speak about, it's funny the model we've gone for. We've taken state regulation and disguised it as self-regulation. These are state bodies, and their interests, as we saw, for example, during Westgate, where the police were actually, their interest was to clamp down on information, and Harun turning up there and telling the media how they're doing a good
Gathara,
job.
I think to be
No,
fair,
let's be fair.
To be
Can I-
fair,
can
the
I-
fact is,
no.
not every
bodies-
state
No.
agency is bad.
Wait, let Gathara
No,
finish.
the idea that the very state that is oppressing the press, the very state that is arresting them, is somehow
I know why that
defending
discussion
them.
is very
That's
true,
like
but I
saying
think
we don't
we need to
expect
be
the
fair.
police
Yeah.
to
We
arrest
need to be
because they
fair.
are a state body.
I
Let
just
me
need to be fair to our colleagues who run those, statutory
Institutions.
bodies, and they are really doing a good job in their own sense and in their own, the environment, as it were. Self-regulation here simply means if there is a misdemeanor, then public or whoever is an interested party needs to report that to Media Council. And let's not even talk about Media Council. You want to look at KUJ, why does it exist? They should be the first ones there. The media house's lawyers should be the first ones. Once your journalist is arrested, you should be the people standing beside him and, solidarity forever. Yes, basically that's what we are saying. It doesn't mean that we should castigate what has been brought in to protect journalists and journalism as a profession, but maybe we should strengthen or even look for people who are a bit, who are more assertive about why they exist and how they should exist.
Okay. Finally, before we go into something else.
Yeah, I think we need to look at, in terms of interrogating that issue, look at what are some of the bodies that then can push for some of these things that we are asking for. Article 19, for example, with Henry Maina, have done a great job in the past in protecting, safeguarding the freedoms of journalists and always being out there, to defend them. So we need to just, I think what is missing for us is not that hasn't been done. What we have not done is look at it beyond the release, oftentimes, of journalists when they leave the police cell. We imagine that once they are out of the police cell, they're now free.
They're free.
What we need to have is have those conversations on the table. When you look at most of the coverage, for example, by the mainstream media after Odongo's release, there's been nothing about it.
They all forgot about it.
They've all forgotten about it. Bringing that conversation to the table and interrogating that. And I know, for example, that Article 19 will be asking some of those questions. What we want to know is how do they go about it? What are the questions they're asking? Who needs to answer some of those questions? And that all these things that need to be done within the framework of the laws that are there.
Let's now move on to something else. And Gathara, there is Justice Mubin Ngugi in the High Court yesterday declared Section 29 of the Kenya Information Communications Act, Cap 41, unconstitutional and this is to do with, messages, which of course the police were using to arrest.
Right.
And your comments on that in terms of if it's a good milestone for bloggers and media generally,
well,
it's freedom of speech.
It's actually, I think, a huge step forward for not just bloggers, but for all Kenyans. Don't forget that these laws were being abused to arrest almost anybody. I mean, misuse of telecommunication system was one of these vague charges that they could brand on anything. You know, anybody who said something they didn't like, who did something they didn't like. We even advocated opinions they didn't like. Once they were talking of somebody using the phone to advocate for, I think, gay whatever.
Right.
A gay lifestyle or something, which was rubbish, And the fact is, this law, I mean, they should have seen it from a long time back, When the Security Laws Amendments Act were thrown out in I think in 2015, the provisions that covered the media, the judges were quite clear, saying why they were throwing them out, and one of the reasons was the vagueness of their wording. The fact that it was impossible to know what was actually being criminalized. And it was the same case with this law. And the fact that the police insisted, on implementing a law that was so obviously draconian and unconstitutional, and in a way tells you something about the commitment that these guys have to upholding the rights of people. They really don't care so much about whether your rights are protected by the Constitution. Our police, our executive, the guys in there, are really looking for ways to clamp down on the expression of speech, on free expression, on the expression of opinions, and they're finding all these obscure laws. Don't forget, it's not just that one. There are laws about undermining the authority of a public officer that nobody knows what it means. Even now there is a law against imagining the death or even arrest of the president, or everybody even thought of Kenyatta being jailed at The Hague actually committed treason by our law.
By our
that's in the penal code. So we need to go back and ferret out all of these laws, that are contrary to the Constitution, because we have not amended the body of law that we have, which existed prior to the new Constitution. We have not yet gone through it and amended all of it and made it compliant with what the Constitution requires. So I think we need to go out, get rid of all these laws that are simply being abused by bureaucrats and police everywhere, so that we end up with a law, a body of law that actually reflects what's in the Constitution.
Okay, Koki, one of our responsibilities as a media is to inform. An article like this, obviously, for those who may understand it, know it's a major step. How do we get that information out? Because one of the things that would happen is that the police use the lack of knowledge of Kenyans, really, for them to go against the law and arresting.
I keep singing the media literacy aspect of the media. But I think, like Gathara said, it's important. First of all, for us as Kenyans to understand what is in the current constitution and how it kind of moved away from the old constitution, and then again align which other supportive laws exist with the current constitution, and also to emphasize the supremacy even in the constitution of all the laws that are in the penal code, and especially relating to expression, opinion, the press, etc. Because then once people understand that, then other laws become diminished. As you can see, the judge was very clear in stating that the law is vague, and we've been existing in a long time in spaces that are vague, and if it is vague, then it contravenes more important laws that we should be able to look into. So I think it's the onus of the media. When a story like this comes out, and even the journalist aspect, the blogger aspect, tell us something more about what is my right. Yes, I am free to say such and such a thing. The limitations are.
Okay. I think we're in agreement that there's so much that we have to cover this morning.
Could I just comment on this? I think, as you know, it's yesterday was a big day for media, but the challenge is that we do not find mainstream media players being at the forefront of some of these issues. The matter was first brought to court by a blogger, and then other institutions like Article 19 joined in. But now as mainstream media, all media is celebrating, but yet we have not been present, throughout. I think what is missing is the presence of mainstream media in interrogating some of these issues, because they affect not only, bloggers, for example, but they also affect the operations of mainstream media, particularly in the social media space.
How would that presence be created? Is it
I think part of it is, even when some of these laws are being drafted and there's response and we're given opportunities to do that, we never get to participate. Then secondly, that even when this matter went to court, we didn't feel the presence of mainstream media, even the kind of coverage that the story got, was actually missing. It almost looked like it was a blogger's affair.
And actually what we have now is the results. We don't have the history because we didn't cover it right.
Yeah, and I think beyond even just the covering, mainstream media has resources. These are the sorts of cases where they can be enjoined. And I'll go back to talking about the Media Council and saying, their absence for me here is again telling, because they should be at the forefront fighting for these things, So I think for press itself, both in the individual capacities, so as corporate organs, but also in the places where they come together, from the Media Council to Media Owners Association to Editors Guild, etc. All of these have a stake in ensuring that the environment within which they operate is free. It is loosed from such laws. So they can't simply sit back and say, well, let some blogger fight it out, because it actually in the end affects how they can do their business.
How they do their business.
I think going forward, we need to, the prominence that this story is given is important, that we should talk about it, give it as much prominence and publicity as possible, and actually then point out what this means, for those that are in media. I think that needs to be clearly stipulated.
And very briefly, because I want us now to move on to Mutua's...
same old.
It's still within the same thing in the laws, and the fact that he as a CEO has declared, some of the content that has been airing on TV, there was that Coke advert that had to be edited. So the question would be, is he becoming the moral police? Is he overstepping the line?
Maybe just to add value to this debate, really we are leaning on one organization, that is Article 19, to kind of be the mediator for everything. And if you look at it, it's really a civil society kind of institution, whereas we should be synergizing all our efforts together, not just the mainstream, the regulators and the professional bodies need to come together to agree with what it is. Now, the way I understand the Kenya Film Classification Board, just from the word classification, it's more about, determining what time certain shows should be based on content. All right, but I highly doubt it's about editing the content. It is just determining, in their opinion, what would be suitable for children, what would be suitable for different types of audiences. And of course, in a bid to ensure that certain audiences are not exposed to, information that they don't need to have. And I go back to this debate. The irony is, information is not just from media. This is not the days of Voice of Kenya, where news started, TV started at 5 and ended at midnight. Please, it is not that kind of situation. Neither is it a situation where we can say it's the only source of information, because we have DSTV, we have all these, all these digital media things coming in, and you really, really can't determine what a specific person is doing at a specific time, while consuming media. However, that is not to underrate the importance of what that segment, what they're trying to do. It is all right. But what I'm just wondering is, if he or his organization is going to look at content and edit content out. I mean, they'll spend a lot of time doing things that otherwise is none of their obligation.
Chrispus, your take on this particular Mutua
issue.
Yes.
I think I've been quiet for long because I wanted to get the gist of the thinking around the panel. Definitely I agree with other thoughts, but of course I don't agree with other sentiments that have been expressed. My question is, I don't know why we as a country, we are so fixated on the law. I think we have a problem in the country. When you look at countries like the US, they have an unwritten constitution, yet it is one of the thriving countries on planet Earth. We as Kenyans, everything that is done in this country, we go back to the law. I think it is time that we ourselves started asking ourselves a lot of questions. Is it okay for us now to start aligning ourselves to the Constitution as opposed to being regulated by the Constitution and the many laws that we are thinking about? What Mutua is doing, I think, is critical, and it is a good thing to be done at this point in time, because you need to know, you need to look at what sometimes we air on national TV when families are seated there. God forbid, I don't know, sometimes back, I think I saw an advert. I won't actually mention what it was, but I think it was demeaning to the family institution. So I think going forward, Mutua should be supported because we need a lot of regulation, especially
but on what grounds would he be doing that? Because how do you determine what's good for me? Who gives you the authority to determine what's good for me and what's not good for me?
No, you know, we need actually to have a just society. Let's not run away from that. We must have a just society that respects values.
No, Michael, there are two issues here, and I think Chrispus is really treading on dangerous ground when he suggests that we shouldn't pay attention to the law. You know, the law is the only thing standing between us and the arbitrary, even violent exercise of power.
So what does it say?
So
what does it say
let
of
me
us?
finish. The law, what does the law say? The judges who are charged with interpreting the law looked at Cap 222, which is the Films and Stage Plays Act, and said that that law was not written to regulate advertising. It was not written to regulate dramas. You know, this is what the judges said in 2007.
Gathara, the fact that you are looking at law to behave as
that is the law. The moment you say that the government officials should not pay attention to the law, then what did you say about Odongo? About him being grabbed?
I think you got me wrong. I said the reason why I said very clearly that we as a society, we must now start asking ourselves questions. Do we align ourselves to the law, to the letter and spirit of the law, or do we change the law? I think we have a problem. We as humans.
I think
maybe we need to be clear, Chrispus, just to be very clear, are you saying that we should not be governed by the law? Please make that clear, because it may be misunderstood. And of course, the law is there to ensure that we live in harmony.
No, Michael, I think I was very clear when I started prosecuting my thoughts. I said very well that we as Kenyans, we are so fixated on the law. Sometimes it actually makes me wonder whether it is the law that has a problem or we as a country. Or we as Kenyans. When you look at countries like the US, they have an unwritten constitution.
No, the US actually does have a constitution.
They have a constitution.
Okay, but again, Michael, I think that is a non-issue for me as of now. Actually, the story that I was looking forward to discuss today was what our boys did in Singapore.
Can I say something probably just to add value? Now, it's common practice world over that content is viewed based on times. And it is true, there is the watershed time, there is, time for different types of content, even adult content. And it comes even in our code of conduct. It's just obviously there. But my question is, isn't it a lot for Mutua and his team to interrogate all content to see whether they negate these national values, which I wonder if they are national or religious or personal.
What values are they?
I think that is a better conversation that we can have.
No, no, no.
Mutua
Let me
be
speak.
left all alone to do that?
All
That
right.
is a good conversation that we can engage on.
Yes, Dr. Buka.
Yeah, the disadvantage I have is I don't know how to shout, so I get lost. But I think we need to look at this matter objectively. I think there is too much emotion around it. One of the questions we need to ask ourselves is understanding the mandate of the Kenya Film Classification Board, and two, then ask ourselves what has it done or what is it, out to do that doesn't sit within their mandate. The responsibility of media is not just, to point out, Mutua bans, but also ask, is he operating within the law? So we have failed, we have failed as media by interrogating that. When the Kenya Film Classification Board had issues with the Coke advert and asked that it be edited, what did the media do? We didn't talk about it. Social media went abuzz, talking about whether he should or shouldn't have, and and what part was edited and what that actually means. We have trivialized the whole thing, and as a result of that, we then find instances where not just what is happening at the Kenya Film Classification Board, but within very many institutions where, because of our lack of being able to interrogate those issues and bring them to bear, and the challenge is having the journalists in the media houses who can say, wait a minute, let's look at what their mandate is. What does the law say? And are they operating within, within whatever it is that they are supposed to be doing? That doesn't seem to be there. We are missing analysis, we are missing interpretation, we are running for, what everybody would want to hear, rather than being the voice of reason in all of this. And so it's I'm hoping that, in the next coming days, that media takes up this and says, we have seen this happening. The Kenya Film Classification Board is set to do this and, is supposed to do this. Are they operating within the confines of the law? And also ask what's their mandate, and why is that then important for us? For example, why should we be talking about banning adverts, and why should we be talking about editing content? Why is that important? But that conversation needs to be looked at in its entirety. We've totally missed it.
Out on that.
I think
I want us to conclude on that so that we go to the Kenya Sevens team.
They are. Right now we've seen Mutua gravitate from policing social mores to now morality, and then now even political opinion. He is suggesting that he can lay down laws or rules to decide how you can express your political opinion. So that he is the one to decide when you're becoming derogatory. So if I stand up and say, well, actually the president is corrupt, that he can say, well, that's derogatory speech. It shouldn't be on TV. And this is my point. Where is he getting these powers? He is inventing them, and we are indulging him in these inventions.
I guess that's what Dr. Buka is saying, that we need to have that conversation. Is
It's
it
a very
within
dangerous,
the confines of the law?
It's a very dangerous trend, especially given that we are going into a political competition now. Political season. And it becomes an easy way for government, again, to squeeze out dissenting opinions by simply getting one of its functions. Don't forget, this is not an independent regulator we are speaking about. This is a guy who is appointed directly, by the executive. So if they find you're saying things they don't like, it's very easy for them to get him to simply say, well, actually, that is not good speech, it's not allowable in the watershed, and he removes it.
Okay, so evidently it's a conversation that needs to carry on. Chrispus, you wanted to talk about the Kenya Sevens team, which of course we are still gloating and enjoying. And your comments on the coverage on that, especially given that our politicians thought we had actually won the Rugby World Cup.
Oh my goodness, I must admit that I wanted to talk about a number of things. One of them was actually the win at Singapore by our boys. The other one was the political meetings that we had.
The rallies over the weekend. Okay, let's start with the rugby side.
He's giving his wish list.
Let's be open. Those were the major stories of the week. So, I think
but those cannot be more major than when we have a ruling by the judge, which is calling
journalists how you look at it. But let me say this. I think I might be one of the happiest person on this panel for two reasons. One of them was the fact that mighty Man City on Saturday thrashed some noisemakers somewhere at Stamford Bridge, 3-0. I don't know whether you saw that. And we are on the UEFA Champions League. I think we are headed to the semi-finals, which is a good thing. Number two, it is now the obvious what our boys actually did in Singapore. It is commendable. And that is a story that I expected to see on the headlines from Sunday through today. The media has done pretty well. I've seen a lot of coverage. The headlines were impressive. But now the question is, why are we celebrating after the win? Where were we? Because you need to look at what is happening even to the Harambee starlets. We are not celebrating them for winning, actually for qualifying for the African Women Cup of Nations for next year. So we have a problem there as a country and as a media, because there are underlying issues that preceded our qualifying for the Singapore finals as a team. Number two, I think rugby is a game that is not known, and it is a game that is associated with a lot of hooliganism. You need to look at what happened at Machakos last year. You need to look at what happened at Impala Safari Sevens whenever they go there. So these are issues that we as the media, we must now start highlighting for us to streamline our sports, not just rugby, but even football and the other sports that you can think about.
Gathara, sports has always, for one reason or the other, even now, been one of those that we put in the back page. And for one reason or the other. But now that the boys have won, we have them on the front page. How do we keep that conversation going? And not just their win, but the sports fraternity in general has a lot of trouble. Right now, we know that the anti-doping law was approved, but just, you know, we almost got dismissed just with a whisker in the nick of time. So really, the bigger conversation is not just the celebration. It's great and it's good. But how do we keep that conversation going so that sports in this country is given the prominence that it deserves?
Well, I think sports does get a fair bit of prominence. I don't think that, yes, when we win. You know, this is for me quite reminiscent. I remember when we beat the West Indies in cricket. And suddenly everybody was a cricket expert. And then when we lost, we all forgot about it.
Now, right now, nobody knows anything about cricket.
Yeah, precisely. You know, it's the same thing. I mean, I remember the Sevens team itself was fitted a few years ago when they beat France in the Sevens. And again, big hullabaloo, quickly forgotten. So I think for me there has been, I mean, if you concentrate the back pages, and the back page isn't a bad place to be honest, you know, there has been some following of what's happening in rugby, the wrangles, if you will, within the KRU, the problems that the Sevens team has had from the changing of coaches, etc. You know, I think that has been fairly well covered.
So you're satisfied with the coverage so far?
I wouldn't say I'm satisfied. I think it's getting there. There are still issues I think that need to be articulated. I think we need to take long-term visions and views about this, you know, especially when it comes to asking about the support from government, you know, for sports people. You mentioned the water bill, which for reasons I can't understand, you know, took so long, you know, even sort of almost threatening our ability to play in the Olympics, you know. So we need to interrogate that, and we need, I think, to go beyond that and start looking at policy issues, you know, and asking what the government, what our policy towards sports is, towards supporting sports. What are the threats to sports? You know, things like doping are big, major problem in athletics. You know, need to be corruption. You know, is another that's been cited. You know, as a problem across the board. You know, we need to be looking at that. But I'll say one last thing. I'm very uncomfortable myself when the media arrogates its role, itself the role of sort of beating the patriotic drum. You know, and I think we saw a lot of that in the past few days. Now, in and of itself is not a bad thing. You know. But when it is used to obscure other things, so when you hear guys saying, well, all we want to see is what's happening in the Sevens, not what's happening in the politics. You know, then what we are doing is we are saying, let's privilege the quote-unquote positive, and ignore the rest. And we've seen that, even Chrispus has suggested it here, that he wanted to come and talk about the sevens, not this other stuff. This other stuff is the meat, is the bread and butter, is what means tomorrow you will wake up and you won't be thugged on your way out. People won't come and take your possessions, etc. They matter. When you ask about how government acts, about how it utilizes its power, it matters, it's important. And that should never be put aside just for a few feel-good moments.
Okay.
Let me
and we need to be summarizing because time is up, believe it or not.
I think, looking at media's coverage of the rugby team, that was commendable. And in as much as, Gathara might not be too happy about the patriotism around it, I was happy about it. One, a break, from politics. And, another big story around Kenya that has an international appeal. And I must say that personally I was biased, because in the team are some of my former students, the likes of Collins Injera. So that was a big story for me. But I like what he says about, interrogating policies around sports. And I think oftentimes sports doesn't make it to the headlines, the front page, or doesn't get as much prominence unless Kenya has won some gold medals or unless, we won, what happened over the weekend. But there are various issues, policy issues that need to come to bear. I watched an interview yesterday where Benjamin Ayimba was talking about the challenges that they've had, in preparation for that. His boys not having pay for 5 months, the fact that they had no allowances and all that. And that in itself, then, he was asked a question, then what is it that has kept you going? And it's painful, for us to now come out and celebrate when we haven't, supported the team and we haven't, made sports a prominent aspect of who we are, and yet we are very fast to come out and celebrate the victory. Had they not won, would they have made any headlines? Maybe not. And so, but when the policies are in place, it doesn't matter. Whatever it is that happens, it just means that we have made sports, a part of us, and that we understand the importance of it, especially, in terms of uniting a nation. But the reason why I was happy again with that headline is we know the power of sports in unifying people and unifying nations. When Liberia was at war for 14 years, one of the ways in which, people found a way of, getting together, even under the civil war, was through sports and football. And so I think, with the events that happened over the weekend and, the divisions, we had 2 rallies, people had different opinions about that this was a good thing, for us to rally around this. But it doesn't mean that we then relegate those to the back. It just means that we can have other conversations alongside, the politics.
Okay. Very briefly as we conclude.
Michael, I'm not sure why you put the women last to talk about sports.
It was not coincidental. It was not intentional.
But I think celebrations are in place. More the story of a Kenyan being in charge of a team that won, I think, should be one of the key focus. This Bernard Ayimba, and what he has undergone and how he has galvanized people around the sports. And like what Chrispus says, rugby is a national sport ever since Machako 7.
Director says time is up, and we really have to wind it up right there. Thank you very much.
Before we wind up,
Chrispus Yankem, time is up. Time is up. I know you want to throw a spanner into the works, so let's wind it up right there. But thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And that's where we're going to wind up Newsroom this week. I know there's a lot that we needed to discuss that we may not have, but time waits for no man. So it's time for us to wind up. But do stay with us right here on Morning Express. Coming up, we've got some news updates. Then after that, we'll go to your health.
This is KTN News.